Welcome back to Gnostic Media's UnSpun, episode number 79. We're here tonight. I'm broadcasting from the rim of the world in the Southern California mountains, where we're having a heck of a thunderstorm. If the power goes out, just to warn you all, it is a thunderstorm. You might catch a lightning flash in the background there. Of course, Gavin, we're talking to you from, where are you? England somewhere.
Kent. It's
Kent.
Just outside of London.
Yeah. So we got an international call here with the possible interruptions of nature and weather and God and all of that stuff. So, Gavin, it's good to have you back. You were on the show about 3 or 4 years ago, episode 187, I believe.
That's right. Yeah. Thanks, Jan.
Yeah, and we had discussed the degradation of modern art as a form of social degradation for the destruction of society, etc., the Dionysian mysteries and all of that, and I wanted to get into that tonight. I should also mention thanks to everyone who donated this week and supported the show. Really appreciate that. We can't do it without you. This is a listener-sponsored show. Going on to almost 9 years now. Another month and a half or so will be 9 years of the podcast, so been a long time. But anyway, Gavin, welcome back to the show. Good to have you here.
Thanks, Jan. It's good to be here.
Well, you want to give us a rundown of what the audience is going to get a bit of tonight?
Okay, I suppose I'll start by saying I'm an artist and a musician, and as an artist, not just somebody who makes art, but who looks at and enjoys and appreciates and is interested in art. My interest is in the object itself, the content, what the thing is, not the context, what it's about. I have an interest in that, but it's very much secondary. What the purpose is, who the artist is, what they did, and why they did it. I'm interested in the content. And there is a clear distinction. One of the recognizable distinctions between content and context is you don't need, like, say, for example, I don't read Egyptian hieroglyphics, but I can appreciate them on an aesthetic level purely by their content, what they are as a visual image of some kind. The content of the context, of course, is interesting, but it's not necessary. I'm not excluded by not knowing the context. And it's interesting if we think of modern art, perhaps the idea that people have of modern art, and I would say that many people, if not most, have a clear distinction in their minds between the terms art and modern art. And that is that with art, there is kind of like, say, the assumption that you can have a purely aesthetic, kind of like, say, without a translator, without being explained to you. Whereas with modern art, it needs a kind of a mediator, a go-between. It needs the context to be explained. And at this point, I think it might be good to just kind of illustrate that if we could maybe bring up the image, the Martin Creed piece, The Lights Going On and Off from 2001. I mean, we don't actually have to bring it up. But
it's up on screen now.
It is up on screen, great.
Yes.
I mean, this is kind of low-hanging fruit, really, with this, because there's very, very little aesthetically.
It just so the audience knows what they're seeing. They're looking at a photograph of an empty room, and this is called artwork.
The lights going on and off, and of course the context is obviously the elevated point in that. It is all about context. It's not about content, because taken on its own, I mean, it's a little bit like, I'm sure you heard that, you know, I've seen those photos of like somebody had put like a pair of glasses in a gallery in the corner, and all of these people started taking pictures of it because they assumed that it was a work of art. In that respect, you see, the gallery is the context. So anything that appears in the gallery is therefore a work of art. No,
somebody pukes their lunch on the floor and everybody starts photographing it.
Of course, because I can explain it, and because I'm kind of like, say, because I'm a curator and I have context.
And you'd have to be a pretty good sophist as well. I think you'd have to spend some magic there.
Absolutely, yeah. But you see, the central problem, you see, that is, this isn't a passive thing by any means. It isn't non-art, it's anti-art. And the reason why that is, well, I'll give you a little bit of background. Maybe if we could bring up the image by Manet, Alba Folie Berger, that painting.
Yep, it's on screen.
Okay.
Here, I'll just I'll cover my face so that you can talk and they can see you while you're describing it.
Okay.
I'll just be here picking my nose or something. Nobody will know.
Okay. Well, when I was back there in art school, we had where they used to teach art history. They had this thing called visual culture, where you would essentially, like, say, for example, the first lecture and then discussion used this piece of Barreau Berger, this painting by Manet. And apparently, well, the reading of this painting was that, because the semester was called Gender and the Gaze, and the reading of it is, the young lady is surrounded by mirrors, and there's a man, you know, a client at the bar, and he can see her from all angles. That's the male gaze. And that is apparently what that painting is actually about. I'm very glad that somebody told me. I probably don't need to say to you that this is a Marxist reading of it. But if it was maybe 90 years before that, the reading would have been along economic lines. The girl behind the counter is the proletariat, symbolically imprisoned behind the counter, and the top-hatted bourgeois gentleman then purchasing her wares, and she is but a cog in the capitalist system or something like that. The point is, you can read anything you want into it. You can look at, for example, as I do, I look at the healthy complexion of the young girl. I look at the bottles of alcohol and I look at the fruit. The meaning is, if you want to maintain a good complexion, if you're going to get drunk, make sure you eat plenty of vitamin C so you don't get a horrible hangover. That's my reading of it, and it's every bit as valid. The point is, everyone can do context. Everyone can read what they want into everything. What very few people can do is content. What very few people can do is paint a painting like that painting by Manet. And this is the important thing. When context is elevated over content, this is essentially something that anybody can pull out of their ass. If we could actually bring up the next Manet piece, Le Déjeuner sur les Herbes, please, Jan.
What's it called again?
Le Déjeuner sur les Herbes. Lunch on the grass.
I'm not seeing that. Did I miss that in your...
It's the one with the naked girl.
Okay,
sitting.
here we go. Yep, I got it.
Yeah, the naked girl, yeah. Okay, now... This painting. It
was my American knowledge of, or memory of my 18, 19-year-old study of French.
Okay. Okay. Well, now this painting is considered one of the most important, one of the first paintings or recognized modernist works of art or modern art. For a variety of reasons. The main one, perhaps, is that it caused a great scandal at the time of its exhibition, which is, I think, 1863. Now, the reason why it caused a scandal, it wasn't because you have a nude woman, because the nude was a long part of Western art, but usually in the context of antiquity, mythology, or classicism. Now, the fact that the young men that she's sitting with are dressed in what was then contemporary clothing tells the viewer that this is a real-life setting with real people. And this naked woman is sitting quite comfortably with these fully clothed men. Secondary to that, her gaze, she's gazing boldly at the viewer. She isn't demure, she isn't hiding behind a fan or anything like that.
So there's three.
Sorry?
There's three men involved then.
Yes, yeah, there's the male gaze as well. But her gaze is the empowered one, you see. Now, this caused a scandal at the time because it was considered really immoral, it was outrageous, there was much tumult and shouting. And all of that scandal is gone now. The reason being because that context is no longer valid because those people are dead. And with their passing, so passes that context. But what we can do is we are bequeathed with the work of art itself. So the context, that's fine. Context is infinitely malleable, can be adjusted, can be changed to whatever agenda you have. But the work of art can be regarded on a purely aesthetic basis for what you see in front of you. Now, to contrast that, if we could perhaps bring up the image of that book, Memoires by Guy Debord and Asger Jorn.
It's up now?
Okay. Now, this was a book by the situationists Guy Debord and Asger Jorn, published in 1957. The cover of this book is sandpaper, and it was described by Guy Debord, I think it was Guy Debord, as an anti-book. The sandpaper cover is designed to destroy every other book in your collection. And this is a very, very important point to bear in mind. This anti-art is totalitarian. This anti-art has no time for diversity, has no time for kind of like, say, difference of opinions. It's wholly ideological. and it's predicated upon the destruction, the absolute necessity of the destruction of everything else. So if you think of, like, say, let's go back to our Manet paintings, the context gone, the context erased. You go to the reading of the will, but there's still this painting.
Which one?
Like, say, if we were to think about, like, say, those paintings by Manet, you know, you go to the reading of the will, there's this painting. You go to the reading of the will these days, and it's, fuck you, there's nothing left for you because we've destroyed it. This is very, very deliberate. It's not a passive thing. It's not, these people aren't chancers. I mean, did I send you the image of The Fountain by Marcel Duchamp?
Oh, sure, of course, yeah.
Yeah,
the famous, this is Duchamp's famous fountain. This is what they call modern art. You take a toilet and you write your name on it. And
he
it's
wrote
all about
Armut on it, actually. He wrote
Armut, yeah.
No, to my mind, that was from 1970.
And didn't he buy like 67 million of these toilets too and sell them?
I know that there was. I know that for some time, there was this controversy about replicas of it, and I heard that as well, that some other artists actually went and pissed in it, you know, because he was using it for what it is. But to my mind, it's what we're seeing 100 years later is Duchamp times 1,000. It's the same thing. It's just context.
Right. Well, and to give, just to interject here, to give people an example, recently, maybe a year or two ago, there was, I believe, a Chinese woman doing her modern art, and she was menstruating on a piece of paper, and that was her art.
Yeah, because again, you see, and this is something to bear in mind as well, kind of like, say, with the shock value, because so much of, like, say, context depends entirely upon novelty. And where, I mean, I would actually draw a distinction between early modernism, like, say, pre-First World War art, and what came afterwards. I mean, as it happens, like my favorite music is the late Romantic, early modernist music of particularly France and Russia from 1880 to 1920. But sorry, you want to say something? Oh,
somebody in the comments made a joke about Duchamp's fountain. They said, such beauty.
Yes. Yeah. Well, yes. I think he called them ready-mades. Yeah. So there you go. I've kind of lost what I was saying.
I'm sorry about that.
That's quite all right. But yeah, this is it. When it's dependent upon novelty, and this is something that happened very, very early, because there was the kind of, a lot of this was because modernism tied in with the modern age, the machine age, and many, even Claude Debussy, said that, you know, that the age of the aeroplane needs its own music and stuff. So there was this great excitement about the modern age and stuff like that, and everything being new and novelty. And you had, like, kind of like, say, a lot of this very, very ironic, kind of piss-taking, light-hearted music, like, say, and art being made in France. A lot of it was very good. But the problem is, what we're left with is the idea of novelty and the shock doctrine. You see, how do you hold people's attention? It's like, and it's this idea, like, oh, it's daring. Do I shock you? Am I disconcerting for you? Am I shocking your bourgeois values? Well, no, you're not. No, you're not, because now you're boring me. No, you're boring me profoundly. And not only that, what was shocking 100 years ago? I mean, the thing is, what was shocking 100 years ago is nothing now. I mean, well, how can you shock people now? I mean, you have to turn up and cut your own fucking head off.
Right, and that's the whole thing with it, is that they're always trying to up the ante. And so what you just did right there is you just reversed the whole process. So now, when we see someone doing this modern art crap, we just say, you're boring me.
Yeah.
You know, this is junk. You don't have talent. You're boring me. Undermine the whole thing of it.
Absolutely. You see, how can it be? I mean, how can this kind of thing be shocked? I mean, I would actually kind of like say wonder how anybody could be shocked these days, because it was different even 60 or 70 years ago, when the prevalent pop culture ethos was very family friendly and very kind of like, I mean, this is something kind of like, people marvel these days that, like, kind of like, say, in the 60s, the sainted 60s, that the biggest selling album was The Sound of Music. And the shock horror, the Beatles were kept off the #1 spot by Engelbert Humperdinck. But the reason is because that's what most people were listening to. Most people were listening to kind of like, say, easy listening, ordinary. These were, you know, they were quite successful subcultures, but they were subcultures. And posthumously, you know, we're led to believe that like absolutely everybody turned in, tuned on, and whatever, you know. But the world we're living in,
everyone took the CIA and MI6's LSD thanks to the Beatles and Grateful Dead and Rolling Stones.
Good job, guys.
And you all got your knighthoods. Good job. Yeah, now we know what the knighthood is about. Good job.
Well, yeah. If you have rebellion by the rules, controlled rebellion. I mean, the interesting thing is, like, I think of, like, say, in terms of those contrasts, I'm always thinking of, like, say, as a cultural touchstone, not so much the 60s, but the 1950s. Particularly, there's that Marlon Brando film, The Wild One, from 1953. He plays Johnny, this motorbiker guy. And there's a line in it, somebody says, "What are you rebelling against, Johnny?" And he says, "What do you got?" He's a rebel, you see. He's a rebel. What are you rebelling against? What do you got? Meaning he's not actually a rebel at all. It's completely controlled. It's completely fabricated. And it does a variety of things. It sells a fake rebellion. It sells a fake kind of, like, say, idea of kicking, when you're not actually kicking against anything, really. But the cultural ramifications of that might have been, and along with sort of Blackboard Jungle, which came out maybe 2 years later and taught the kids how to behave like delinquents, highlighting the kind of like the kind of like juvenile delinquent thing that probably wasn't that prevalent, really. But we'll highlight it with a kind of like, say, a rock and roll soundtrack that kind of like, say, excites everybody and turns everybody on. But The Wild Ones came out 64 years ago. That's 64 years. And I'm not saying that absolutely everything from that point on was peddling the same kind of fake controlled rebellion. But that's very much been the ethos. And that's 64 years. That's a very, very long time. And the problem that sorry, did you want to say something?
I was just going to say, you know, just to put it in simpler numbers, that's 2/3 of a century. So when you know, that is a good long time.
You know, and one of the problems I have with these things, this is a purely aesthetic issue that I have, in that the drama of light and shade, if you think of, like, say, the old theatre masks, the smiley face and the sad face, the need for contrast, for balance, the kind of drama that you'd hear, I suppose, in a Beethoven symphony or something like that. But when you have a culture that is entirely kind of like, say, entirely about the dark side, and that's as fake as one that's all about sunshine and lollipops. It's fake, essentially. It's the stock response. People know how to mope. People have been taught how to mope and look miserable and be nihilistic. And that's fake. That's as contrived as anything kind of twee and cartoonish. But because this has been so prevalent for such a long time, it leads to two very, very distinct two distinct problems. One is that people who have grown up, marinated in this kind of, like, say, youthful rebellion, find it hard to transit into a kind of an adult culture. I remember.
That's the whole point, and we've covered this agenda of extended adolescence, arrested development, extensively.
Of course. And I mean, there are many problems with that. I mean, if that speaks entirely, you see, because what we need to do here, like, say, for example, with all art of any level, separate the context from the content. If you want to listen to your Jefferson Airplane album, if you really like the music, great, that's fine. That's fine. You know, if you're kind of like saying being hoodwinked into the idea that it kind of like say has some significance, then, you know, or maybe I shouldn't say hoodwinked, but maybe if you're reading a significance into it, well, maybe that's unavoidable. I don't know. Maybe it's very difficult to separate these things from context. But one of the problems is if you're an adult, if you don't die young, essentially, will this speak to you? Will this cover all the vicissitudes that life entails? As you get older, as you get sick, as you begin to lose, as people around you begin to die, will this culture be enough?
Well, you know what, and to answer your hypothetical question there, I see people in their 60s and 70s all the time. You know, a couple of months ago, I went to a Grateful Dead and Company show. Of course, you know, the CIA's favorite band to shoot back at you guys, and so you know, you see these people in this later stage of life, you know, and you can see them everywhere. They're, you know, it was like being at the Dead show was like being at the zombie apocalypse. It's like, where's my shotgun, you know? And but you see all of these people in this later stage falling back to their youth, falling back to what was 50 years ago and you know, and when you hear a song on the radio, it brings that nostalgia back that immediately kicks it into right.
Yeah, and we're not going to feel things as keenly as we feel them in youth. I mean, that's one of the unavoidable kind of like, say, pains and bittersweet pains and beauties of life, that there is this sense of loss, that those sensations are so intense to us in our youth, but we have to kind of like, say, we have to kind of realize that those keen sensations, to a large extent, we're leaving it, or it's leaving us, like all these things in life tend to leave us. And you know what? I've absolutely nothing against if people are sincerely, if they love this music, that's absolutely fine. I just wonder at kind of like, say, does it speak, will it provide, say, the consolation or the kind of like, say, understanding that you need to navigate through life? Maybe it does, I don't know. But perhaps my main issue with it, the second kind of like, say, cultural ramification, is where it leaves youth today, our youth, say, 10 years ago or 20 years ago. You see, youth, it's a very, very interesting thing. Youth is like a catapult that's been pulled back. As a child, you're living within the parameters and the definition of, say, parents, authorities, the teachers, and stuff like that. And with this upswing of hormones and energy and life force and burgeoning agency, the catapult is let go, and there's this incredible energy, and all cultures need that. All cultures need that intensity, that earnestness, and that vigor. It keeps things sharp, it keeps things fresh. And in youth, you're finding yourself, you're exploring the parameters, you're going as far as you can. You're naive, but that's fine. That's part of the experience. That's part of the process. Now, I remember, like, when I was about 14 or 15, when I first dyed my hair, and I had like my head shaved at the back and sides, and I dyed it black, and it was all back combed out on top and down over my face. And I was suspended from school. And in fairness to my father, I mean, my father was like, he was born in 1930, so he was then like kind of in his mid-50s. In fairness to my father, he went down to the school and defended me. He said, you know, you've no right to kick him out if he wants to look like that. But had I walked in, and if my father said, looking good, son, hey, I used to have hair like yours, I would have cringed. I would have died, because oh, stop, oh, the horror, you know, it's like wrecking dad or something. It's just wrong.
Well, and Gavin, you know, I see these punkers out there today, the next generation of, you know, 14 to 18-year-olds, all in their goth get-ups, wearing their Ramones shirts and their TSOL shirts and this and that. You know, and I look at them and it's like, wow, they actually think they're original, but that's the exact uniform that we wore in the 1980s. You know, 30, 40 years ago, we wore that same uniform.
But the thing is, like, you see, again, like, I should say, in fairness, like, because when I was, like, you know, I'm talking about the mid to late 80s. And with the exception of, like, say, some goth or post-punk stuff, I was listening to mainly, like, 60s and 70s music. It was new to me, you see. And that's enough. That's enough. And if I see kind of kids and young adults, that's fine. That's part of their experience. If it's new to them, that's okay. My problem is this. There was an article in this music paper about 22, 23 years ago, during the time of dad rock. Do you remember dad rock? No. That was a genre. That was a genre in Britain, like bands like Oasis and stuff like that. It was around the time of Tony Blair and Cool Britannia, where everybody was pretending that was 1965. There was nothing beyond the Beatles and the Stones, and let's all just pretend it's like, you know, whatever. Utterly kind of like, say, regressive. Worse in the sense of saying, like, no, that's the gold standard and we don't deviate from that. And there was this article anyway in this music paper, and the headline was, "Oi, son, turn that music up." You know, the generation gap is over. And I'm not saying the generation gap is a good thing, because we know that that was contrived as well for a variety of reasons, to polarize generations, but also to capitalize, you know, to sell them cars and records and crap, you know. But at the same time, there is that cringe factor. If you're like 15 or 16, and I mean, I don't know, maybe this isn't necessarily universal, maybe isn't the case for all kids. or young adults. But I know for most, they want to define themselves in some way, as they need to define themselves as being separate from the parental group of the previous generation.
And that, well, even that though is manufactured. The whole teenage thing is manufactured, you know.
Well, what I mean by that is it's an innate kind of human need to kind of like say in youth to test your strengths and to find your parameters and find your boundaries, and that's one of the signs of it. It's Italian with that. And increasingly, as kind of like, say, Generation Xers, my generation, and boomers, we're kind of looking over their shoulder, and we just won't get out and leave that little area, leave them have that little area and say, you know, and be kind of confounded and shake our heads saying, I don't know what this noise is. This is what we should be doing, for God's sake, you know? It's like, we should, because then they feel, yes, well, at least it's something different, but they should be allowed that. And I wonder sometimes, like when I mean, because millennials get a bad rap. They're dismissed as generation snowflake and things like that.
I mean, well, it's, you know, some stereotypes aren't so inaccurate.
I know, but hear me out here, kind of like, say, being the kind of being sort of like Mr. Compassionate or something like that. It must be the long hair or something, I don't know. And see this, 46 and I still can't grow a beard. My inner Grizzly Adams is just going to hang fire. But I wonder, you see, that, like, you see, when I, like, say, for example, again, when I was 18 or 17 or 18 when I came to London, you could get a dead-end job. You could get a room in a house or a flat, like, for 30 quid. And I did. I had a crappy job. I had a room in a flat. I could go out and kind of club and drink and stuff like that and party and be irresponsible, like, about 4 nights a week. I didn't have to provide fucking DNA and, like, kind of like, say, the contract of the soul of my firstborn now to get a bloody room in Greater London, which is the way it is now. It's a lot harder. Those kind of responsibilities are far more pressing on that generation than they were from my generation. And I wonder how much of these things, and I wonder how much of, like, say, the fact that they've been bombarded with kind of like, say, a sedentary lifestyle, pornography, gaming and stuff. And I'm not kind of like, you know, everybody do what they want, you know, but I mean, the time was spent, I don't know, that's not for me to say. But I wonder how much of the kind of what role, if any, this cordoned off energy, the fact that they haven't had this free reign of kind of like, say, youthful energy, I wonder what role, if any, that has played to the kind of rise of, say, the social justice warriors or the alt-right, or...
Well, sure, yeah. I mean, well, and you add in the soy and tofu and, you know, the low-fat veganism, and you've got, you know, and then people can't form relationships with pornography and stuff because their whole idea of a relationship is porn, so... Then you end up with a city the size of London filled with snowflakes.
You see it, and it's I can sympathize with that. And of course, there's many reasons, there's many factors that will play into that. But I suspect that one of them isn't having that kind of, like, say, that period where they're very, very sentient of or conscious of defining themselves against the previous generation, because the previous generation and generations, I should say, plural, aren't giving them that space. Like, say, for example, there was this article, I don't have the citation for it here, but this was in the Telegraph. It was published back about 5 years ago, and the headline was about the NME, that music paper. The NME's cool list is deeply shocking. Did we fight the punk wars for this? And this is this guy in his, like, late 50s, you know, very, very middle class guy, going on about the punk wars to say, you know, it's not about you. It's not about your youthful experience, man. This is theirs. You know, it's like time to just kind of, like, say, let that thing go. But it's difficult. Of course, it's difficult. It's difficult to let these things go. It's difficult to transit into a different culture, especially if you don't know another one. That's why I would say that The Wild One is a very, very important film. Not just that, but that seems to be a touchstone. Because previous generations, like, for example, they were, like, say, for example, the generation of the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, they would have, like, say, heard, like, the Andrews Sisters and stuff like that, which is, whether you like it or not, I mean, I think it's very, in terms of content, it's very interesting music, very interesting harmonies, and of a completely different ethos. They would have heard of a far more kind of, like, say, maybe diverse variety of, well, maybe a variety of perhaps melody and harmony. than people would hear these days, for example, where they would hear minimum melody and harmony. You know, so there's less kind of like, say, the musical lexicon is shrunken. But again, I can sympathize. It's hard to kind of like transit out of that. But this is as well, this will touch upon as well why people have such an intense emotional response to kind of like, say, consider 2016, the year that people died. Oh my God, people died. You know, it's like some celebrities, you know, died. I mean, many artists that I really like and admire died. But people die. We die. That's part of life. You know, it's like shock horror. Somebody born 70 years ago has died. And it happens, you know, but because people identify so strongly with these people, and this ties into this idea of like the people in the West, we think that we're secular. We kind of like say, you know, we believe we're secular humanists and we leave all that sky fairy thing all behind us and stuff like that. But people in the West have been marinated in countless years of, say, Christian iconography, even if they came from cultures like, say, some Protestant cultures that didn't kind of like, say, big up the iconography like, say, Eastern Orthodox or Catholic faiths did. The image of the kind of like, say, martyred kind of star. I mean, I was mentioning to you earlier about like say, if you think of like, say, John Lennon around the time of those photos from around the time of Abbey Road, where he's in the white suit and he's got the long hair and the beard, looking kind of messianic and stuff. And I should say, by the way, that the long haired thing, I mean, like, say, that was around for a lot longer than the hippies. I mean, lots of like, say, musicians, like, say, Nicolai Paganini, the violinist. Many people see him actually as a prototype for the kind of heavy rock, long-haired, widdly guitarist, who used to play this widdly, speedy violin, shrieking kind of hysterical violin, you know. And then the bushwhackers, you see pictures of the bushwhackers from the Civil War era, they often had long hair. And so I think that there's something archetypal there, that like the long hair in some way signifies a maverick or perhaps outlaw or outsider spirit in some way. So the hippies, that wasn't kind of like, say, an invention. That wasn't in a sense new with that. But I do think that, like, kind of like, say, the high profile arrests, think of like, say, the arrest of John Lennon, Yoko Ono, the arrests of the Rolling Stones, Jim Morrison being arrested on stage. These are iconic images of the men, that is, like, say, the Pharisees scolding the kind of like, say, this messianic.
Yeah, and that's the whole stage show that the youth has presented, because meanwhile, you know, they're all agents. Jim Morrison's dad starts the Gulf of Tonkin, Vietnam War, and all of this stuff, and then he becomes the
Morrison, yes.
And then, you know, so you have the federal CIA, MI6 type agents doing these stunts to degrade the society, and then you have the local cops coming in saying, you know, we got to close this down. And so then it's all staged. They can point at the local man and say, look, you're trying to suppress our image, and the local man falls into that.
Oh yeah, and the difficulty as well, you see, is which you will have encountered when you're talking about things like this. It will meet a lot of resistance, because these are the kind of like, say, the Latter-day Saints. These are the kind of like, say, holy figures. They, you know, these figures that you've invested, like, say, somebody by the age of, like, say, their 40s or 50s or 60s, 70s maybe, they've invested decades of love in this music and in this figure, and they've identified with something, of course, not necessarily what it actually was, but they are identifying with something. They're not going to give that. That's a little bit like if you go up to a believer and you give them evidence to disprove. They don't want to hear it. So they'll say conspiracy theorist or something like that, as if it's a kind of a magic talisman that'll sort of truth in some way. You know, it's like, you know, I mean, you know,
wave my wand and make you go away.
But yeah, I know, you know, and it's like the attitude, the interesting attitude that people have to the mainstream media. Most people accept, for example, that the weapons of mass destruction was a lie. The Iraq War was predicated upon a lie. That there was the dodgy dossier with the BBC that the BBC pushed. People know the media lied about that. And in recent times in Britain, Jeremy Corbyn, who's the leader of the Labour Party, and this is regardless of what one's political opinion or what one's opinion of Jeremy Corbyn is, but it's very, very clear that the media were just ripping the hell out of this guy, not least the BBC and not least the left-wing Guardian newspaper. Just ripping this guy to shreds. And many people, admirers, say, of Corbyn, they'll know this, and they'll say, oh, the media, they're liars and stuff like that. And then they'll post an article from the media because magically at this point they just happen not to be lying, and they agree with me. So it's like there's this kind of like, say, a partition in people's brains, you know, for kind of the media. The media are lying when they're saying things I disagree with, and I can see but I have to agree with this, so they must magically be telling the truth.
Right, and then meanwhile they're just controlling both sides of the dialectic.
Of course, yeah. It's really the easy thing to do. So it's very, very hard to kind of like, say, get people to perhaps even entertain the thought that there's something in this, you know, because you're asking them to essentially question. And that's where, you see, this is where I would jump in and say, that's fine. The good news is that's context. So you can get, there's the content though. That means you can listen to these records and really enjoy them for what they are. These are still essentially pieces of music. You can enjoy them as an aesthetic experience. You don't have to throw the record in the bin if it's a good record. Well, you know, it's like you don't have to get to. But the trouble is, you see, it is imbued with context, and it is imbued with ideology and self-image and identity and things like that. And this is where it's very, very difficult. And you know, it's
The key is detaching your emotion from it and seeing it for what it is. If you can do that and just enjoy the music or the art or whatever it is for the context, or just observe it, not even necessarily enjoy it, but just observe it for what it is. You know, because that's the thing is, you know, so many people get taken up into it. Like for me growing up, Danny Elfman was my favorite musician. You know, for those who don't know, but what's that?
He did soundtracks, like he did The Simpsons.
Well, yeah, but you know, originally he started out as the lead singer of Oingo Boingo, and that was the biggest scene here in Southern California for like 2 decades. And then he went in and took over Hollywood. Okay. You know, so he was the lead singer of a rock band. Every Halloween at Irvine Meadows Amphitheater, the place was sold out for this band, and that's what everybody did for Halloween for like a decade and a half. You know. Yeah.
But I mean, the thing is, it's again, if you like the music, you can separate that. That's the importance of content and context and being able to differentiate.
Sure, even though now I can see his agenda through it all, you know, and you go back and you start looking at it in context of like what we expose in music, mind control, and psychobiology, and Danny Elfman's work is filled with it.
Of course, yeah. I mean, I think you see as well as anything else, kind of like, say, for a variety of reasons, it's very, very, very difficult to, and we can't disregard the power of iconography and archetypes and how we resonate these things. And whether we like it or not, these things have embedded themselves in our consciousness, and the role that these things play in kind of like, say, changing our positions on things, or changing how things play out. I mean, another kind of like say interesting in terms of like, say, the Christian, like say the iconography. I sent you that image of the hunger strikers, Jan. If you could put that up, perhaps.
All right.
Okay. Now this is from, I think it's from 1981, and I don't know if I don't know how familiar people are with the hunger strikes, but they were Irish Republican prisoners in they were I don't know, I think it was in the H block, yeah. And they were the reason why they were in blankets was they were protesting against being categorized as common criminals. They considered themselves political prisoners. And to cut a long story short, anyway, they went on a hunger strike. They wouldn't wear the uniform. They didn't cut their hair or grow their beards. What people saw, and even people who were unsympathetic to the Republican cause, what they saw was these suffering, martyred, Christ-like figures. And it's very, very interesting, you see, because I mean, up until the late 90s, there was a policy at the BBC that if they were talking to somebody from Sinn Féin, for example, the Republican Party, they would use an actor to overdub the voice in a Northern Irish accent. I mean, it's silly, but it was something to do with kind of like not giving no platforming terrorists, you know. And as with any kind of no platforming, it's like kind of, you know, you don't have the right to stop somebody from speaking. More importantly, you don't have the right to stop somebody from hearing what somebody else has to say. So it kind of backfired massively on them anyway. Whereas the Unionists, like say the other side in the Northern Irish struggle, they had they would have a platform. Now I wonder actually, if in contrast, if you could bring up the image of the Orange Order march, Mian. In contrast, you had the Unionists, who were kind of like, say, all marching in bowler hats and fife and drums. Now, if you looked at kind of like, say, Republican protests from the 70s and 80s, you saw a lot of like long-haired guys like singing kind of folk songs, and it was all kind of very "We Shall Overcome," and it tapped very much. It tapped very, very strongly into. Oh, I should actually say at this point, that whilst I'm Irish, I've never been to Ulster. I don't have a dog in this fight. I don't have any affiliation with either, like, say, Republicanism or Unionism. I'm talking purely about about images and archetypes and how this can change over time the political landscape. The Republicans, their very image, the culture they employed, this kind of like, say, which was more folk song oriented and stuff like that. It tied into kind of like, say, the general leftist movement throughout America and Europe at the time. Whereas the Orange Order, they'd be out marching in their bowler hats and fife and drums and it didn't tap in any way into the youth culture. And if you think of, like, say, people born in the, or kind of like, say, people who came of age in the 60s and 70s who were then in kind of Parliament in the 90s and what have you. So fast forward to nowadays, like there was an election recently, and the Conservative Party, they didn't get a majority, so they called upon this Unionist Party, who are considered really kind of like, say, beyond the pale, because because the political the landscape has changed entirely in terms of, like, say, what's acceptable and what's not acceptable, what is part of the establishment and what is seen as anti-establishment in some capacity. Again, whether this is nothing to do with what one believes and stuff, this is purely the iconography. And in the 90s, there was a couple of films as well that in some capacity aided this. And I remember being in London in the 90s. There was a couple of films. One was Michael Collins, with Liam Neeson playing Michael Collins. There was In the Name of the Father, and Some Mother's Son was a little bit later, which was about the mother of a hunger striker. And I remember there was some controversy in some of the press that was glamorizing or glorifying the Republicans. I mean, I remember seeing the film In the Name of the Father, a little bit of background. That's about the Guildford Four. There was these 4 Irishmen who were accused of being bombers erroneously, and they were in prison for years, for decades. But it's the story of one of these chaps, Jerry Conlon, and his experience. But how the film opens is this: it opens with a riot scene in Belfast. To the soundtrack is Voodoo Child by Jimi Hendrix, and it's really glamorous, and you've got the long hairs like throwing bottles and stuff like that, and then the army in their kind of armored cars kind of going down. You got like women bashing dustbin lids and stuff like that. It's all very romantic. It's all very heady, and the camera cuts to it's Daniel Day-Lewis, who's cast as Jerry Conlon. And he's miming I can't remember if he's got a Hurley or if he's air guitaring. He's miming to Voodoo Child by Jimi Hendrix. And, looking really charismatic, really cool, very handsome looking. So it tied in culturally. It kind of made it far, far more attractive. The point is that this is purely to do with kind of like, say, the role that these things can play. I'm not saying that was the only reason why the kind of like, say, the consensus has changed, but it certainly is a contributory factor. And if people can kind of like, say, unpick these things without judgment, without saying, no, this is wrong, or this is like, but just kind of like say, firstly, what is it that I'm being sold? Who is it that's selling it, and why is it that it's selling it? But most importantly, what is it that's in me? That's kind of like, say, that's adopting a particular position in regards to this. What is it that's in me? And generally, we tend not to do that. We tend to, particularly to images and things like that, we respond in a visceral sense, in a very emotional sense, in a very kind of like, say, unreflective sense. So we're already there. We're already kind of like, so we're already taking a hit of speed, and we're already bombing along on the emotion. So we're not actually thinking about what it is, and we're not actually thinking of kind of like, say, why. Like, we don't think about these things. I mean, a recent case of point is like, said, Clarence the Lion. Remember Clarence the Lion? There was this lion that was murdered by some asshole. And I mean, that's awful, but at the same time, it's just, as a social control experiment, it's just so easy. This thing goes viral, all these people are outraged about this, and then they forget it.
Well, even look at the word that you just used, murdered by this asshole, right?
Well, yeah, because I mean, there's absolutely no reason for it. I mean, like, kind of like, say, if you're going to kill an animal because you need to eat, you know, if you're going to go out and hunt for some meat and stuff, that's fine, that's grand. That's not this guy just killed this beautiful endangered creature for vanity, you know. But that's my view on it anyway. Others might see it differently, but they're wrong. But but the point is, it's like all this outrage and everyone's you know. I mean, or there was like, a couple of years ago, there was like this picture of this, I mean, it's awful, this picture of this little boy on a beach in Turkey who drowned, and this was in connection to the migrant situation. And this image was everywhere. And there's this political program on the BBC called Question Time, and all the politicians are sitting there, and we were all moved by those images on our TV screen, looking at everyone, and everyone nodding, yes, we were all moved by that. Well, you weren't very moved by the images of, like, say, children in rural Pakistan killed by drone bombings during Obama's administration, were you? Because you didn't fucking see them. Because they weren't all over funnily enough, you know, so there wasn't that much outrage for that, and I'm not singling out Obama. This could be
you gotta give Obama credit, though. I mean, as a puppet president, he really mastered the emotional appeal. I think SRI and the Esalen Institute really guided his whole administration. You know, well, because I mean, he was really the symbol of the snowflake, right?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. You see, the thing is, what people have to bear in mind is, you don't get to be the president by being a nice person. You get to be the president by being a patsy, a prostitute, or a ball breaker.
And a murderer, you know. Don't forget that.
Yeah.
Mass murderer.
Mass murderer usually it helps. That gets you brownie points, certainly. And I mean, it's one of the things that I kind of despair of, is this naivety, or this, again, it goes back to the question of kind of mystification and demystification, that people don't want their reality threatened to that extent. They don't want to consider that the world is run perhaps by people who don't have their interests at heart. They don't want to consider this. They want to think that perhaps that, you know, if we just say love or something like that, but love without, I don't know, love without being challenged in some way, love without struggle or sacrifice, well, it's not really love, is it? It's sentimentality, you know? And again, I'm not diminishing a desire for a kind of, like, say, a better society. And I don't think it's impossible either. I think we can do things, and it's a lovely thing. But when you're talking about, like, say, the controlling establishment, when you're talking about kind of, like, say, pardon me, the fact that it doesn't matter who the hell gets in. This is the same things play out anyway. The same thing is done anyway, and everything is smoke and mirrors, you know. And I mean, I don't have any affiliation to any political party. I don't, you know, but I did. I mean, this kind of, like, say, meltdown that we're seeing these days, you know, in regards to kind of, like, say, like with the American election last year. If it was Bernie Sanders, I'd have said something, but it's Hillary Clinton. It's like, you're getting upset about Hillary Clinton. But the thing is, it makes you realize it's not Hillary Clinton. It's not Donald Trump. It's an opportunity to kind of, like, say, to square up and define yourself against the other in some capacity. Right. And it doesn't matter what. I mean, I could be wrong here. But am I right in thinking that Donald Trump was the only Republican candidate to wave the rainbow flag? Or something like that. But it doesn't matter if he did that and he wove the way around, but it doesn't matter what he does. He could be found, like, doing whatever, but he'd still be kind of, like, say, phobic this, phobic that. And equally to the other side, it doesn't matter that he bombed Syria. It doesn't matter that he hasn't built his wall. They'll say it's the deep state. But it doesn't matter. They'll make excuses because he's the God Emperor. You know, he's our man. He's there. You know, and these people are just conduits for kind of, like, say, people's helplessness, and also people trying to hold on to a system that's...
Well, you know, Bernie Sanders was caught, or his wife, somebody was caught in a big scandal, I think, in the last week or so, but... I
shouldn't be at all surprised.
Well, of course, and, you know, the thing that really got me the most is, you know, and people can Google this and just type in Bernie Sanders clenched fist. Now, what does this clenched fist mean? Well, if you think of the Bolshevik Revolution and the murder of about 60 or 70 million Russians, you can start to get a picture of what it really meant. And so...
Jan, no. I'm sorry, Jan. That wasn't real communism. That wasn't real communism.
It wasn't real...
That's not... You see, the real communism is a bit like... You know, you sometimes see horses They're not real horses. The real horses have horns and wings, and they flutter around the place.
Oh.
The fact that nobody's ever seen it, and the fact that we've tried repeatedly to see we've tried repeatedly to.
Well, my point with that is just that here he's using this 100-year-old symbol that really symbolized mass murder, and then he has the nerve to go around and parade about it for his presidential campaign.
Yeah,
and the people eat it up.
Well, yeah, because for one reason is because he's a man on a stage with lighting and with kind of like say, so there's the leader and you respond accordingly.
The alpha up on the stage, and you you put some peacock feathers there, and
also as well, you see, because people think the alternative is literally Hitler. Or kind of like say they think the alternative is absolutely unspeakable, and there's this whole kind of like say idea of like say the lesser of two evils, which is a bullshit idea anyway, because any evil is
picking left-hand path versus left-hand path is still left-hand path.
Absolutely, exactly. But I mean, I think that the main thing, as much as anything else, is the importance, the desire there is for people to show what side that they're on, and to show, I'm not that. That's what it is. I'm not that. And a lot of the outrage, I think, greeting, like say, that's kind of like say the you see these days in regards to Trump, it's an opportunity because people are terrified of being, because these days, of course, like say the very fact that we're having this conversation, we'd probably be considered Trump supporters or something.
Probably, yeah. Even though neither of us are, but it's just the fact that you discuss the facts and the hysteria of the snowflakes that you get labeled these things.
Well, this is it.
And let me just say something. And if the people in the audience are having that reaction right now, they are actually the snowflakes that we're speaking to.
Yeah, because you should be able to hold an idea. You should be able to kind of like say bear that in mind and not be freaked out by it. It's really not like I'm coming around to your house and threatening your cat or something. It's like, it's not such a big thing. But the importance here is the gesture politics, or what people these days call virtue signaling. You see, I remember kind of like say going back again when I was growing up in Cork. I was born in 1971. And I remember, because I left Cork a long time ago. I left Cork in 1990. And Cork at the time, or Ireland at the time, was a very Catholic, conservative culture. Now, many people talk about, like, say, there was the same-sex legislation 2 years ago, so same-sex marriage was passed. And many people said, oh, this is great, this is wonderful, what a victory for progress. But I'll tell you something. A sizable amount of those people who voted for that were the same people who kind of like say, when I was growing up, would be whispering and gossiping if you came from a broken home, or if you're a young girl and you had a child out of wedlock. What changed? It wasn't a victory for progress. What changed was what they were told you see, it used to be like say the church and the government. Now it's the government and the media establishment, and they followed it, and they followed the lead. And the thing is, what really pisses me off, and if there are any real progressive listening here, that can change just like that. And it can turn fucking
absolutely
nasty.
Well, and it's just.
And if you don't think it can, okay, just look at civil wars. Just look at the Balkans. Just look at the civil war in Ireland. Just look at the civil war in Spain. Like say, for example, the civil war in Ireland. You had fucking guys who went to school with each other, killing each other. Very, very good people can turn pretty monsters. Or well, they don't turn monsters, but the events can make monstrous things happen. And if people are so naive that they think that can't change like that, what the hell planet are people living on? It's like there was another one of these things. I remember, like, leading up to the Brexit vote last year, there was this comedian, again on this pantomime program Question Time, there was this British comedian, Eddie Izzard, and he was, I won't say he was arguing for the Remain campaign, because he wasn't arguing, he was just expostulating and being passionate about things. They all say that these days, I feel passionate about this. If you feel passionate about something, it means your emotions are inflamed and you're probably not being very rational about it, so maybe you need to just take a step back from it. That's just my thought. No, I know this is as a hothead myself, but I remember at one stage he was saying kind of, I don't understand this. I thought we were all moving towards one world together. And I think, well, I don't know what the fuck gave you that impression, man. I don't know what planet you're on that would give you that impression. Not just that you look at human history, but if you look at the world at large, no, you can have I mean, I was I lived in London for a number of decades, particularly when I lived in Hackney. I had a really, really good time there. I really, really enjoyed that. And Hackney was, at the time, a very, very diverse, ethnically and culturally and economically, a very, very diverse area. And it was brilliant. It was great. And people got on, and it was wonderful. That can happen. You can have that. But equally, you can have the Balkans or Rwanda. You can equally have...
Well, you know, you may not know this. I actually lived in the Balkans during the war. I lived in Serbia and Yugoslavia during the war. Uh-huh. And, you know, the whole thing was fairly well staged between England and the United States and Germany, you know, because Yugoslavia on its own in a matter of 20 years became like the 8th most powerful country in the world. Yeah, you know, so you had you know, Franjo Tudjman and Ali Izetbegovic, who were these war criminals who managed to get into power. Like the first thing that Franjo Tudjman did when he got into the presidency of Croatia, which is kind of like the governor. But first thing he did was he flew the old Croatian Nazi allied flag over the Croatian capital. And the last time they did that, you know, the Croatians had massacred tens of thousands of Serbs. So the first thing the Serbs did was pick up their arms and go attack Croatia. It was all... And then they could, you know, sit there and blame the Serbs for being the aggressors in the whole situation, right? Okay. But you know, you had like 40, 50 years of history of this, you know, of mass genocide against one group of people.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest, I know very, very little about the specifics of it. What I'm talking about is, I suppose, when you have neighboring people.
Sure, yeah, well, and I knew people like that there that this happened. In fact, you know, an in-law went to go on a fishing trip with some people that he went to school for, you know, years before, just like you said, like old brothers. Yeah. And he gets there, and one of them killed the other one.
Yeah. And this is what kind of I find very, very frustrating, that people choose not to see that. They think that having an ideology is a magical talisman against the brutal reality, the often brutal and monstrous realities of the world. Yeah, you know, but again, you see, it's a question of, and this is one of the great disillusioning factors that you experience in life, or certainly I experienced going through life thinking that most people wanted to find a solution, that most people wanted to find agreement, understand where the other person is coming from, and perhaps, you know, kind of like say, we'll find something we can agree on, let's find a solution here. Well, I mean, a lot of people do like that, but what we're seeing these days massively is people just reveling in othering those who disagree with them, reveling in kind of like, say, signaling their own kind of whatever at the kind of like, say, at the expense of any kind of people. I'll give you another case of point. I mean, I remember seeing some time ago this clip of Russell Brand. He's a comedian and an actor.
And he's you know, MI5, MI6, whatever, palling around with the Queen, full-on elite, selling the agenda.
Okay, but this clip I saw anyway, he was talking to this young fella, this working class young guy, some BNP support, you know, the British National Party, their kind of identitarian party, and he freaks out at this guy, saying, "That's wrong, you're just being racist, that's just being horrible." And I remember watching it thinking, if I was that young fella, and if this very, very wealthy, pampered guy who's got loads of opportunities, who doesn't kind of know what my situation is, what am I going to do? Think, gee, he's got a point, you know, I'm wrong there, or will I double down? Equally, if I was Russell Brand, and if I was in that, well, funnily enough, I was in a situation like that when I was about 18 or 19. I wasn't long in London. And there was a mutual friend. There was this guy, like, who I met. He was a friend of a friend. And we'd meet, we'd bump into each other in the pub, we'd get drunk together, we'd have a laugh. It was great. And I remember one night he said something about gays. He hated gays, or he said it like he hated fucking queers and stuff. And I just said, why? And he said, I said, yeah, but okay, but like, say, if you're talking about like what people get up to in private on their own, how does it affect you? He said, I just fucking hate it. And it's about, you're investing a lot of emotion in something here that doesn't necessarily have any bearing on you. I mean, what threat did why are they kind of like, say, bothering you? Anyway, that was left. That was, well, you know,
and on the other side of that, as a parent, and what you see throughout the United States and Canada now, is the transgender and gay community forcing, you know, no right comes without taking something away from something other group. And rather than just doing their stuff in private, they're demanding that the rest of society bend and cater to this. Even now, legal documents will no longer say mother and father. They'll say parent 1 and parent 2 specifically for this community. And you know, never mind that they're, you know, we can track the agenda going back to Tavistock Institute and SRI and all of this, the Planned Parenthood promoting this whole agenda and transgender. In fact, I just did a show last week covering this, increasing soy in the diet, low cholesterol diet to promote this whole thing. And I was just speaking to someone yesterday. They were in LA, and people that he was saying that people that you used to see wearing Dodger uniforms are now, you know, wearing transgender, you know, snowflake outfits. So it is definitely having an impact.
Well, that's not. I mean, that's not what we were talking about here. Like I said, this is like 20 odd years ago.
Yeah.
And that's another matter, really. The point is like that he was investing a lot of emotion, negative emotion that wasn't doing him any favors, against an abstraction, against people who say didn't mean him any ill. In this sense. Now, I remember like some couple of months passed anyway, and I bumped into this guy again, and we got chatting, and he said, you know, I was thinking about what you said, and you know, you were right. And he went on to explain that it was the culture, the background that he came from, which was a very similar background to the one I came from. And that is, if you didn't signal being anti-gay, you were gay. If you didn't violently show that sort of thing, you know. These days, like, if you don't signal being anti-gay, you're anti-gay. So it's like it's the same principle essentially. But the point I'm making is that if like, say for example, Russell Brand in that instance, if he was really, really concerned with changing hearts and minds, if he was really, really sincerely interested in kind of like, say, rectifying this guy's views on things, he would have tried to understand him. He would have tried to reason with him. He would have tried to like maybe give him the mental space to question why he had those ideas in the first place. But I suspect that wasn't his point. His point was to gesture his virtue or his righteousness at the expense of somebody else. You see, I'm not going into kind of like, say, the rights and wrongs of things, or kind of like, say, but this is purely about vanity here. This is purely about how kind of like, say, there isn't, sadly, a desire to kind of, there isn't truly this desire to kind of like, say, for people to kind of meet each other halfway and find solutions to issues. Well, there is, but we just don't see very much evidence of it. So.
All right, so we still have a couple of images left. You want to go into those? We have an image of Pan and another one.
Okay. What's the other one?
Michael Craig Martin, an oak tree.
Oh, yeah. Well, no, we could actually put up Michael Craig Martin, actually, as like, kind of like, say, we're going back to what we started off with.
Okay.
This is a piece called The Oak Tree. And again, this is entirely a question of context over content. There's an explanation for why it's an oak tree. And, okay, can you look at it and as a shelf and a glass of water and say, that's okay, because aesthetically that works for me? It's very, very hard to see it as anything other than a glass of water on a glass shelf. But this is the kind of triumph, the elevation of context over content. And in many ways, see, it's the elevation of kind of like, say, the same kind of befuddling process that in many ways we've been talking about in a roundabout way. One of the successes, I think, if you can call it a success, of, I suppose you could. I mean, I remember reading an interview with the director of Tate Modern, Nicholas Sirota. He's now Sir Nicholas Sirota, of course. He's been knighted. And he was saying that Tate Modern, which was very successful because there's loads of people going into it on a daily basis, he's saying this was evidence that the public now got modern art. The thing is, Tate Modern is like the London Eye or something like that. It's one of these things because it's people go to it. It's something you do. It's a day out, and you can walk around and kind of gawp at all these things and say, yeah, that's very interesting. That's very interesting. And then go away and talk about stuff that you're actually interested in. But what a lot of this work, I will say, does is appeal to people's vanity, because this is one of the, you see, you can't underestimate the power of vanity and how kind of like, say, like say for example, when people often when they list their top 10 albums, they won't list their actual top 10 albums. They'll list what they think is coolest, you know, what'll give them the most kudos. And there's no kudos really to be attained by walking around the National Gallery and looking at lots of beautiful paintings from, like, say, the 17th century or something like that, because everybody could see that. Anyone can look at a Titian and say, oh, it's a great painting. But I'm specially see because I can see the beauty in the ugliness. You know, I can see the kind of, like, say, the beauty in the darkness and things. The darker something is, the more profound it is. Of course, that's what we've been told for the last sort of, you know, increasingly for the last sort of like 80 years or 20 years, perhaps.
What was that experiment? I can't remember the name. Somebody brought it up to me last night, in fact. But, you know, when you put like 10, 20 people in a room, and then they all say 1 + 1 is 3, and then you introduce somebody new into the room, and 85% of the people will go along with what they're told. So what you see there is this mind-bending of the public. You know, this glass of water sitting on the shelf is no longer a glass of water. We're going to see it as an oak tree. That
sounds a lot like the Delphi technique.
Yeah, probably.
It's actually how you manufacture consensus, and this is actually. I'm very glad that you brought it up because it's very important to think about, particularly in terms of like people who, like, say, would consider themselves politically radical in any capacity, left or right. Consider this: if you have a bunch of earnest young radicals, all kind of like say hanging around, and one person begins to speak with authority and other people are clapping saying, yeah, you know. Now what you do basically is you put your person in there with a couple of accomplices. One person starts speaking with a clear voice, with authority, with a sense of kind of like say a clear idea of where things are going. The other planted people applaud. So therefore it's like it's assumed that that's a lead, because most people don't want to lead, you see. Most people don't want to take the lead. You know, most people don't want to be the foreman of the jury. And they're delighted, they're monumentally relieved when somebody else comes along to do it. The sad thing about kind of like say, and again, it doesn't matter what side of the political spectrum you're on, which is because it all circles up its own arse anyway, really, is that everything is fucking manipulated. Everything is manipulated. And, you know, the idea of like, say, even grassroots movements, it's like, it's so easy to turn something. Once something gets traction, it's so easy to, when you have kind of like, say, anti-capitalists who are funded by George Soros, when you have anti-capitalists who are funded anyway, it's kind of a bit suspicious, you know, that's the kind of clues in the funding thing, you know. Yeah. And then particularly when you find out where the funding is actually coming from and to what end it is. And you have so many cases of like, kind of like, say, you might have activists like, say, for example, as you had in Occupy London, who were kind of like, say, against say banking, collecting money, and the money was going back to some climate change group or something like that. Nothing to do with it, because nobody knows. Because, you know, it's like the spokespeople for, like, you know, these, you know, Delphi kind of technique practitioners have turned up and kind of like, say, taken the money and gone. But people, it's sad because people feel frustrated because people want to come together in some capacity. People want to affect some kind of change. People are sincere. There's a lot of very, very sincere, decent people out there, very good, who feel very, very powerless and don't know what to do. So again, it's like I won't broad brush anybody. I won't broad brush kind of like, say, you know, kind of like, say, snowflake type people or anything like that. I just kind of like, say, would hope that they just maybe take a couple of, and I could be speaking for myself here as much as anybody else, taking a couple of steps away from one's feelings about something. How you feel about something, because your feelings can be manipulated. You can be shown a picture of a naked woman and your genitals react. It's the easiest thing in the world, you know, ring the bell and you'll salivate. You know, it's the easiest thing in the world. And, you know, if you're feeling angry about something, it's this, you know, it's very easy to generate these feelings. And again, it goes back to, like, say Clarence the Lion or whatever kind of social media outrage everyone is like enraged about and then forgets about promptly when the next outrage comes along. Always ask with these things. Always, like, say, for example, the current thing, kind of, I think it's transgender in the military or something like that. Always ask what else is going on. What else is going on? What's really actually going on? Is this really a thing? Is this really a big thing? Or
what is the point of them even pushing it constantly in the media? What is the agenda behind that? And then you see the Huxleys and eugenics all over it.
Oh, well, yeah, there can be that, but monumental distractions from other things. It's the magic trick of kind of like, say, you're doing this with what the magic has been done with the other hand.
Sure.
You know, it's a hard thing, but you have to be you have to have the mother of all firewalls against these things. Monitor your feelings, and when you can feel your stomach responding, I say this from experience because, like I said, I'm a hothead and I respond to things in that capacity myself, so I recognize it.
Now, did you want to cover this Arnold Böcklin's image?
I didn't, but you might want to show him anyway, just because it's a damn nice painting.
Yeah. Well, you know, and we've covered so much of Pan too on the show, but yeah, we should probably wrap it up here too. We're actually 10 minutes past, and it's way past your bedtime too.
I'm sorry, and I've rattled on and. Oh,
that's all right. I wasn't gonna stop you.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, so anyway, did you want to say something about this image? I have it up on screen here.
I won't say anything about it. They can just look at it. Parting shot.
Oh, well, I guess we just covered the Dionysian aspect that we touched on in the last show.
Yeah. But you know what? It's sometimes a cigar is just a cigar. It's a beautiful painting of a fawn whistling at a nightingale.
Absolutely. Well, Gavin, did you have anything else you want to add?
No, I think that's about it. Yeah, and inevitably I'll think of something else. And I'll be emailing it tomorrow. Shit, can we just kind of like insert something?
Do you have anything for people to contact you if anyone wants to reach out, or you want to keep yourself out of it?
Yeah, well, if they really want to, they there's a Facebook page, Sand Snowman. That's sand like on the beach, and snowman as in, carrot for a nose, melts in the spring. There's also, I can be contacted at minds.com. That's Gavan Kearney. Just that spelling. That's probably about it. I mean, if people, on the, they can see my paintings, they can go to Sand Snowman Bandcamp if they want to download some music and stuff like that as well.
Great.
Okay, or they can go to Tone Float if they want to buy vinyl and CDs. That's in Holland. Okay.
Great. All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for participating. Please support the show. See you next week. I'm not sure who we'll have on next week. Maybe Lennon on or somebody coming up soon. We'll figure it out. Gavin, thanks so much again for covering the subject. It's important for people to understand content over context or context over whatever. Now I'm already forgetting. Anyway, take care. All the best. Take care, everyone. Good night.